And pretty soon, working. Hopefully my internet holds up. I don't have
my side says it's now streaming live.
Awesome.
Annie, do you see us? We've got a thumbs up from the other computer.
Awesome. There's a little bit of a delay, I've heard, so it may be interesting for her.
Maybe she should plug headphones in and not listen to us.
Maybe it just might be weird, that weird echoey thing that happens.
Yeah.
So hey everybody, we're finally live. We're talking about Hamlet tonight in our Shakespeare on Stage discussion. So whether you're watching us live or catching the recording, I'm glad that you joined us. Tonight I have Kathleen Ryman with us, and she is an adjunct English faculty at Yavapai, and we're also waiting on Allison Wimmer. Hopefully she'll be able to join us. She's having some technical difficulties. Another adjunct instructor. We were supposed to have some other faculty here, and I don't know where they are. So we're going to have a discussion by ourselves or with as many people as show up. So it should be good. So Kathleen and I were just talking about the big question, is Hamlet mad or is he not mad? So Kathleen, why don't you share what you said, because I agree with you.
Well, I'm of the opinion that he's not, because he says specifically, the character says specifically that he's playing a part in order to catch Claudius. So I really think it's clear from the text that he's not crazy, he's just acting crazy.
Yeah, well, and because he has that, he tells Horatio at the very beginning, if I seem crazy, don't worry. And then he has the moments throughout where he kind of has the little asides where he's
right.
I think so.
When he was saying, I have moments of crazy, I'm not, he was talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, wasn't he?
Yeah. Right. He's talking about them playing him, but he's going to play them. And so we have a lot of that throughout the play, kind of because you can start to wonder, I think, as the audience, if you're watching it for the first time, you might start to wonder because everyone else is saying, oh, he's crazy, you know. Yeah. But I think what's also interesting is if the other folks hadn't seen the ghost of the king at the beginning, it would be much less clear.
Yes.
Yes. Because we know that he saw the ghost, but if no one else had seen it, then it could be all in his imagination, and then that would muddy the waters a little bit, I think. But because that was another thing that to me was like, yeah, everybody else saw him too.
Yeah, so it wasn't a hallucination because it was witnessed by other people.
Right. And so later on, when we're in when the king appears in the scene with his mother, in this version, they played it where she didn't see him.
Okay.
So I don't remember when I read the text, I remember it being kind of unclear. Did she actually see him or did she not? Do you remember that part? Have any thoughts on that?
If I remember correctly, and it's been a little bit since I've read it, I don't think she saw him. Because when she addresses Hamlet, she says to the effect of, what are you seeing? There's nothing there. So I think with that particular visitation, it was just Hamlet seeing it. So could he have gone crazy towards the end? Possibly.
I mean, he's dealing with some major stuff. I mean, not just that his dad's dead and his uncle's married his mom and all of this other stuff, but just the idea that he's seeing the ghost of his father, you know, and wrestling with that question of, should I take revenge? Should I not? I don't want to kill someone who's innocent if this isn't
right.
Like a lot going on. Hi, Allison. Right. Can you hear us?
I see her.
Yep. We can't hear you. I see you, but we can't hear you.
Oh no, she's muted.
Yeah, it's showing no microphone. That's what I'm seeing, is that she has video, but no mic. You got to turn your mic on. There you go. I think it's working now. Give it a second. So Allison, while your mic is connecting, well, it said it was connecting, but now I don't have a microphone anymore again. So try it again. we're talking about whether Hamlet is actually crazy or not. So you can chime in when you figure it out. She turned off her video too. Yeah, so I think I'm with you. I think that there's definitely that he was playing it crazy the whole time. But then towards the end, we have the saying again. She's trying to figure out her phone. Zoom is just so much fun.
There's just, if you think about it, there's a certain amount of mental instability, especially after Ophelia dies. I mean, jumping into the grave with Laertes and then, challenging him to a duel. And so it's like, what is madness? What is not? I mean, he's obviously not what we would consider mentally stable at that point. But is he completely crazy? Probably not.
See, and I think because even after that, he comes I think he's just dealing with grief. Just that, okay. Oh my gosh, now she's dead and I loved her and the last thing I told her was that I didn't. That's kind of how I saw that it was grief, but not just like excessive grief, but not madness. I mean, we wouldn't say Laertes was mad.
Very true.
Did the same. I mean, he was in the grave with her too. So I don't know. Or Allison. I keep looking, okay, is she gonna fix it or not? Oh,
she is.
Back again and no mic. Allison, try signing off and then coming back on. If you can hear me, do that. Like exit and then come back. Okay. Hopefully that'll work for her. Sometimes it gives her the option to reset the Zoom. Okay. So I think that's one of the most interesting questions. That's what I wrote my paper on. I just did Shakespeare this last spring. So that was my stance that I took. That was one of the prompts that we had to talk about in my class this last spring. And that was mine. It was too well thought out. He had to, and then even when he outsmarts Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, like that's not insanity, right? That's a carefully planned out thing.
A lot of forethought, a lot of, but along the same lines, you look at some of the stuff that Edgar Allan Poe wrote, and there's a lot of premeditated stuff, but you can't say that those people are sane. Telltale Heart.
True. That's very true. Yeah.
But having said that, I'm going to stand on that because the text says that he was playing a part and he knew he was playing a part and he was trying to catch people in the act, that it was very clear that he was completely sane.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And so one of the things, just to get on an English soapbox for a second, that's one of the things I tell students. We all might get different things out of a text, but you have to be able to support it with the text. And I think that's something that's really important, is that is an assertion that we can support. And I did have some classmates go the other way. But I think that he is sane is the stronger argument, in my opinion.
I guess as long as you can support your argument, but I don't see it in the text.
I know, I don't either. So, but it's interesting because you could, if you were directing the play, and I wish Nanette was here to speak to this aspect, that you could play it as if he's crazy the whole time.
Right.
You could make it seem that way, or you could do, and this play, I think they did a really good job of having those moments of sanity and the silliness in the scene where he's pretending to be the crab or the lobster, and he's kind of dancing around. Like, it's so obviously that he's, playing with them. Hey, Allison, I see a phone. So try to talk to us.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. You made it work.
I tried. I am so sorry. I tried getting on and it said the meeting wasn't launched. And so I'm just not, I've done plenty of Zoom, but I'm still getting used to it.
It's fine. Do you want to show your face or do you want to stay in iPhone 2 on the screen?
Well, I don't mind showing my face. I just don't know, like
Okay.
when I tried to, okay, wait.
Let me
what
see
should
if I can do
anyway.
it. Let me see if I can do
Okay.
it, 'cause I might be able to do it from my
And if-
control panel. I think
And,
I just
and if
sent
not,
you a
I don't want to waste
request.
too much time. Okay.
So if you see it, that's great. And if not, that's okay. We can hear you now. So that's what's important.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't want to waste any more time.
All right. Okay. So one of the other questions that I thought was interesting that Stratford posed, actually it was in the introduction to Folger, is why doesn't Hamlet just act? Why doesn't he just take revenge? And Kathleen, you and I kind of started to talk about that before we started the recording, but I think that's a really interesting question to think about too.
Oh, that's really complex. For me, I think it goes back to divine right to rule and having to make sure that he's in the right, which means he has to make sure that the ghost that he's seen and that the others have seen was real. Otherwise, he is also killing who is supposed to be the correct ruler.
Right.
Although you could argue, even if Claudius did not kill King Hamlet, that Hamlet himself was supposed to be the one that took over. So Hamlet is the correct heir to the throne. Therefore, Claudius is still an usurper.
That's
multiple.
But I think that the for me, the biggest thing that I see is just that Hamlet doesn't. It sounds pretty crazy to be acting upon. I think I saw the ghost of my father. So if he goes and says that's not exactly going to come off well, right?
Yeah, he really goes to great lengths to prove, right? To get the play, to write the play within the play so that he can catch Claudius responding, see if he can get any kind of inkling. And I missed it in this version, but what struck me when I read the text was that he asked Horatio, "Did you see it?" And Horatio responds, and I didn't see that. And I mean, I had a 4-year-old running in and out, so I don't know if I missed it in the Stratford version or if they just didn't highlight that. But he had Horatio backing him up in that scene. Hey, this is what I'm going to do. Pay attention. See what his reaction is. So he was pulling in his friend, the one guy he trusted the whole time, to say, give me the backup that shows that he's actually guilty before I do something.
Right.
He really tries to establish, he is a noble character and he wants to do the right thing. I think part of that is just really striving to do the right thing and wanting validation that, because he is supposed to be, such a noble character.
Right. Well, and I mean, you think of it from a personal, just an emotional standpoint. If his uncle didn't really kill his father, then maybe his mom isn't as horrible as he's seeing her as. If she didn't, if she just married the brother, whatever, for what, I mean, it's still 2 months is a very short time, but if she married the murderer, that's different than just marrying the brother.
Well, and think about the time period too. Always go back to the time period. Back then, it was very common to marry a brother. In fact, in some cultures, a younger brother was obligated to marry the widow so that someone took care of her. So that in of itself doesn't seem weird to me, but the idea of, did she know he was, was the murderer? And I think that comes down to how the director plays it.
Yeah, because it was interesting. In this one, I felt like she could have been loving but not excited about it. You know,
Mhm.
it was one of like Kathleen, if it was what you were saying, she needed to be taken care of, or, you know, Hamlet wasn't home yet and that's what she had to do to be able to rule the kingdom. There are lots of reasons that she could have made that decision, but would she be so like joyful about it, you know, kissing him all over? And at the beginning, it was just like, yay, I'm married. And she's so excited. And that seemed like, maybe she did. No.
Yeah, maybe she
I don't
was
know.
involved in this.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen it played where Gertrude wasn't seemingly happy and just kissing on Claudius. So it does raise the question of how involved is she? Or is she just naive?
Right.
Or is she just a woman caught in an aristocracy of, you know, I lost my husband and I need to get married again, in a way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I
I
think
don't
that's
know.
an interesting question. And that just puts Hamlet in even more of a bind, because if his uncle isn't guilty and he kills him, then his mom is now sad again. She's a widow again. And then he's
Right.
guilty. And then the scene in the chapel is really interesting too, where he finds him praying and decides not to get his revenge then. So right after he's sure that he is guilty, he decides not to act because he doesn't want him to go to heaven.
Exactly.
That's interesting to me too.
That is revenge right there. It's not revenge if you send someone to eternal reward.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly, but does it raise questions about again, I think that goes back to Hamlet still not sure if he really wants to, you know, totally get revenge, because if you get revenge, you have to have something to stand on, right? And so I feel like yes, you don't want to send him to heaven to his eternal reward when you want revenge, but at the same time, I think it also makes you wonder, does he really want to kill Claudius?
Well,
I don't know.
it seems like, Hamlet's not just a murderous guy. It seems like that's
Exactly.
just his character. And so just murdering someone doesn't seem like something he would normally do, but he's got, his dad coming to him as a ghost, supposedly. And this play that has just happened, it was his test. If it was a demon trying to send him to hell, or if it was actually his dad or whatever. So he's trying to kind of figure that out. And, if you look at that, even, guys who are in war, soldiers, they have a hard time. You're still killing someone, even if it's the enemy.
Right.
You're still taking life. And I think that weighs heavy on him, even though that's
and
not
it
really
speaks
discussed.
it speaks to Hamlet's intentions and nobility, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What caught my eye in this version too is right after that scene, Hamlet leaves, and Claudius says, "Well, it's my words. My words asked for forgiveness, but my heart didn't," or something like that. Like, am I really clean if my actions don't match up with what my words are saying? So there's an interesting question in there about the kind of like the afterlife, because we have that scene where Hamlet's discussing, is he going to heaven or hell? And he's saying, am I actually clean or not? And then we have the discussion about Ophelia too. Did she drown herself and therefore is in hell, or was she drowned and therefore she's in heaven? And which kind of burial does she get? So there's some interesting questions in there about kind of the afterlife and faith, how faith kind of plays into that. What did you guys think about that? Did you catch any of that?
So, what do you think of the theory that Shakespeare was Catholic? There was a priest hole in his house. His uncle was killed, executed for being a Catholic and for hiding a priest. So a lot of what you see in his plays have Catholic overtones, and the ideas of heaven and hell, and not killing Claudius when he is repenting, because Hamlet has no way of knowing what is in Claudius' heart. All he can see is, oh, he's repenting. I can't kill him now, because if I do, then I'm sending him to heaven, and that defeats my entire purpose.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's interesting, because we don't really know a whole lot about Shakespeare, which is crazy because of how prolific he is now. I mean, he didn't even intend for his scripts to be written down. So
Exactly.
he didn't even know that they were going to live on. And so we just don't know that much about him. So I didn't even know that about him, Kathleen, about the priest hole and the uncle. That's not something that I didn't cover that. I've taken Shakespeare 2 different undergraduate.
That was covered in my Shakespeare master's class, and I was like, I had no idea. But if you look through the plays, very often there are religious overtones that follow Catholic teachings.
Yes.
And
a
it
lot
was
of
very dangerous to be
scripture.
Catholic then.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reference to scripture, too, yes. And it's interesting, too, that Shakespeare had a son, Hamlet, that died not long before this play was written. And I don't know, so it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Did you guys know that?
Allison, about his
Pardon?
son. I remember reading that about his son.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, when we're looking at, in my Women in Lit class, we're talking about Restoration comedy, which is about 75, 100 years after Shakespeare, and they've gone through the banning of theater altogether under Cromwell, and then they come back, and so it's this kind of tug of war between Catholicism and Protestantism, and who's going to win.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it definitely, I think, religion in some way was a part of life. So his audience would have caught all of those references one way or the other, but it would be interesting to see if you couldn't tell from the plays whether he was leaning one way or the other. I think that would be a really interesting project, Kathleen.
And I have come across some articles relating to that, although they were so long ago that, it would be hard for me to pull it out now. But I know that there's an awful lot written that people sort of assumed that Shakespeare was writing from a Catholic perspective. But, how backed up that is, I can't say for sure. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of guessing around what Shakespeare did and believed and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is why it's so interesting to do these discussions, because there are things that we don't normally see. And I think that it's really neat to talk about them and kind of see what we think. And because I think something back to my teacher soapbox, students always think there's only one interpretation and they have to find the right one. And so they're scared to death of any kind of literature.
Yes.
Because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong. And I think these kind of discussions kind of show everybody, whoever's watching, that it's okay to go against the grain, as long as, like Kathleen and I were discussing, as long as you can back it up with the text. But even, you read scholarly articles, and you've got people who've studied Shakespeare, not just taken a class, a graduate level class, but have studied it for their whole career, and they still have different opinions. So
absolutely.
There's always these different things. And so the conversations are important because it's how we make literature real to us and how we make it relevant to our modern lives, which is one of the reasons we're talking about Shakespeare, because here's a guy who wrote hundreds of years ago, and what he writes is still relevant to us, which is pretty amazing.
It really, really is. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
And it's this stories are so, that he writes about, and the themes that he writes about are so familiar and relevant. And that's, I guess that's why Shakespeare is Shakespeare. That's why we should talk about him, because he is so relevant today.
Well, and one of the things that I happened across a video or something, and they were talking about how, it might have been in my son's class, I don't know, but they were talking about how there are so many references to Shakespeare in our culture that there's our expressions that we use, different things that we talk about, that Shakespeare is a part of the way we talk as a society. And so it's kind of, I think, Allison, it's that he's influenced us, but also that we wouldn't understand our world without we've been building on him for all this time. So it's kind of woven together.
That's what I'm always telling students, is that, people want to know, well, why do we have to study Shakespeare? And the answer is because you speak him every day, you just don't know it. That's literally what I tell students, because it's true. We speak Shakespeare every day. We don't know it. And it's important to know where your culture comes from. And that's such a foundational thing. He's so foundational.
Yeah, it's really fun when you read a Shakespeare play and say, oh, I didn't know that phrase came from Shakespeare. Like, oh, goodness. And Hamlet has
it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to turn to another question. And this one is from Stratford, and that's, what role do women play? So we kind of talked a little bit about the Queen and how, whether or not she was complicit in her husband's death, why she made the choice she did. Is it cultural? Was it what was going on, why she made the choice? But we also have Ophelia here. So what do you guys think? Because sometimes modern scholars like to say that Shakespeare was a proto-feminist, which I take issue with, because he would not have even known what a feminist was. I think after studying Renaissance humanism, he was much more likely a Renaissance humanist who was just exploring humanity. But it's interesting to look at how he does portray women in this time period. So what do you guys have to say about that?
Which one?
Go ahead.
Which female character do you want to look at specifically? Do we want to look at the Queen right now, or Ophelia?
I think either one, because I think it's interesting, because when we were talking about the Queen, the back of my mind was saying, look at Ophelia, because here we have a queen who is, Hamlet's accusing her of being a party to her husband's death, of moving on too quickly, of not really loving him, of saying she loved him so much and then just moving on so quickly that she couldn't possibly have actually loved him, without taking into account all the things that Kathleen, you were saying, that whether it was cultural or whether, Hamlet wasn't in the country. So if Hamlet was supposed to take the reins of the country and it was just her, then maybe the only way to avoid anarchy was to marry this brother. So there was a male involved. And then we know that who shows up at the end? My mind just went blank. The other country is trying to invade to take back
Norway.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Norway is trying to invade. So she's in the middle of this invasion coming and trying to figure out what to do. Her son's not here. What is she going to do? And so it appears that Claudius really chose the opportune time to be able to step into those shoes. But
add something to it. Shakespeare didn't write this fresh. He took this from an earlier play, Hamlet. So it goes back even more hundreds of years. So when you think about the role the Queen would have had, now not 500 years ago, but maybe even 1,000 years ago, there's not a whole lot of feminine agency available to that woman. It may well be that she either had to marry him or not survive.
Yeah, which is interesting, because Hamlet is so hard on her. So it's like, that's a reality but yet it wasn't, Hamlet was just didn't care. He was hard on her. And so it was like he was calling her to account for something that she may not have had the ability to be accountable for. But that
Right.
comes back to that original question, is how is she playing the part? Is she playing the part as someone who's happy to be married, or is she playing the part as someone who's reluctantly in this role?
Right.
And I don't know how clear the text is. At some points when I was reading it, I thought, I don't know, she seems awfully happy from the text, but there are other points where she seems kind of conflicted. So it's just interesting to kind of see what role he's assigning to her.
If Gertrude didn't have a whole lot of agency, and I think we can accept that as pretty reasonable, then would she even know anything other than to be happy that she had somebody to take care of her with her husband dead? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's, you know, if you're going back even farther than Shakespeare's time, then it becomes even more like, well,
but see, at the same time, okay, so if we look at medieval women writers, you've got Julian, Teresa, Hildegard, these women that wrote around the 800s to the early 1000s, so about that time frame, and they were choosing to become nuns so that they could get an education. They were revoking their riches, their wealth, their right to inheritance, their right to a family, to become a nun.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that it wasn't maybe the case everywhere. That was obviously a facet of a Christianity that women had that option. So in Denmark and no, I mean, I don't know. I'm not that. That's why we need Suki here, because she's the historian. And so I'm missing her face right now. But so I don't think that women somehow were just like, oh, well, this is my fate. I think they may have accepted it and they didn't have a choice, but they could be happy about it or not. And so
right.
I think Shakespeare, it feels like he's holding her accountable in some way.
I think what you just said is seen in some of his other plays too, especially his comedies. If you watch Much Ado About Nothing, boy, there's some really sharp barbs thrown back and forth from Kate. There's a lot of, I guess, what you would call feminine agency in his comedies, whereas not so much in the tragedies. But it's a tragedy. It's supposed to end badly, and it, you know.
Right.
Right.
Well, and you know, in one of the discussions that we had in my class, my Women in Lit class, is in Chaucer, the wife of Bath gives kind of the story of one of Aesop's fables about the horse and the lion, or I don't remember what it was, but the one made the statue, and so it made the lion look great, but if the other had won and made the statue, then it would have made the other animal look great. And so it's kind of that statement of who's writing history. So we have this version of history that women didn't have a voice and didn't do this, but then we see these evidences here and there that maybe they did have more of a voice than what we give them credit for, which is fascinating to me.
It is. And that would lead into Ophelia. And what Ophelia was saying in multiple places in the play, including the flowers. My favorite part of the play.
Okay, so tell us about the flowers.
Okay, there is a theory that the flowers that she used had not just the one meaning of, you know, flowers for pansies from remembrance, or, you know, rosemary, but also that those were well-known abortifacients. They were herbs that were used to regulate a person's period, to regulate pregnancies, and that she was essentially saying, I'm pregnant, I'm not keeping it, and I'm probably not going to live.
See, that's interesting, because in the Shakespeare version, it was like she was holding her stomach as if she was as if she were pregnant. So that was something that I didn't see in the text, but I wondered about, not knowing about the flowers. That's a really interesting angle. But in the play, I feel like in this version, they did play on that because they showed her, they really did play that up. She was holding her belly as if she were excited.
Right. And if you think about the knowledge that Shakespeare's audience would have, they would have far more knowledge about the herbal uses of those flowers than we do in an everyday life, because we've gotten away from that. We've gotten into more of the, scientific methods, but this would have been common knowledge in Shakespeare's time. There's a really good article on JSTOR if you want to look it up. And I had the book and I loaned it to someone. It's called Ophelia's Herbal.
Interesting. I've never heard about that, but that's interesting.
The article is super short. It's not as long as the book. The book is short. And I just went online before this to try and find another copy, and I can't find one.
Well, that makes so much sense, because you look at Ophelia going mad and you think, okay, she's really lost it. But it makes sense if she's pregnant and here's Hamlet saying, I don't love you, I never did. So all of her, she's disappointed her father, she's disappointed her brother, who have both warned her about this happening, and she falls apart. And then in the end, we see, Hamlet really did love her.
And her station in society will be completely destroyed. Unwed mothers and 500 years ago is a big no-no.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, so it's really, it's interesting, but you see through the whole play, especially in this version, it was really clear how she was kind of being bandied about. Her brother, her dad are telling her what to do, and then the dad says, don't see him anymore, and then he says, pretend you don't love him, and then she's just going along being the obedient daughter and doing what she's told to do. And so we see this kind of picture, if we go back to how are women portrayed, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, she did everything she was supposed to do and things turned out badly because she listened to her dad. She didn't do what was in her heart. And so it comes back to that same thing, that Shakespeare's holding her accountable. Why didn't you do
Is Shakespeare holding her accountable or giving her a way out?
Maybe both. I don't know. It would be interesting to talk to him and find out for sure. But we can't do that. But I just think because Hamlet is so hard on his mom, not taking into account her station or any of those other things that were going on, then we see the same kind of thing with Ophelia, this younger woman who's not a mother yet. She's a young woman. She's under the rule of her father. And so she's just kind of being swept along in the middle of all of this. And so on the one hand, she's a victim, an innocent victim, sort of, depending on which way you look at it. And on the other hand, I don't know.
Okay.
But I wonder. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, it makes me wonder, okay, so Shakespeare is really hard. Well, Hamlet, the character of Hamlet, is really hard on Gertrude and Ophelia, which makes me wonder, well, is Shakespeare really trying to make us sympathetic to these female characters? Is he really trying to, in Hamlet, being so hard on them, is he really kind of being a very early feminist that wouldn't have known that term, but looked around and saw in society what was going on? Like Karen said, more of a humanist. I don't know.
That's an interesting question. Kathleen, what were you going to say?
Typically, in Restoration period as well, when a woman would step outside of the socially acceptable norms, like you said, they are punished. And so her death can be looked at like that. we know, or we can pretty much tell, that she was in an intimate relationship with Hamlet. They were not married. She was not supposed to be in that relationship. So she has most definitely stepped outside of the social boundaries that she was supposed to do. So it is very possible that if we're following the constructs of the time, the only choice was for the author to punish that individual with death. Or if you look at Restoration Theater, you have the near raping or raping of the women who show sexual agency or step outside of their social constructs. And I'm thinking of the Rover in particular.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's interesting to think about that, was he, because I'm not sure that he was actually making a statement one way or the other, but I think maybe he was putting it out there for people to think about. Like, okay, is this Ophelia's fault? Is any of it her fault? Or is she just a victim of Hamlet taking advantage of her, following her father's, doing what her father says? Or did she have a voice? And if so, what could she have done with it? And I think that's, I think he puts that out there for people to think about. I'm not sure whether he's actually making a statement about it, but I think it's interesting that it's there, that we can have this kind of discussion.
For me, her voice is the choice and the flowers. She is literally saying right there, this is what happened. I am pregnant. I'm checking out.
Yeah.
That's new to me, but interesting.
And it's interesting because Hamlet is very hard on her too. He knows that her dad is in the room when he's having that conversation and kind of denies his love for her, but he doesn't give her the benefit of the doubt at all that she's coerced into that or forced into that situation. He assumes that she's complicit in it, and however he realizes is that they're in the room too. And all of this stuff that he figures out with Gildenkrantz and Rosenstern, like to figure out that whole plot and get that figured out, it seems like he could have figured out a way to tell her the truth. But maybe he figured that she was too obedient to her dad, but obviously not that obedient if she's pregnant. I mean, I don't know.
A very good point.
So it's an interesting thing how these women are portrayed. But what is cool about them is that they do have a voice in some ways. They have the mom at the end drinks poison. So she's the instrument of her own death. Ophelia drowns herself and takes these herbs. So again, instrument of her own death. And so it's just interesting how that all plays out. Because even though it's not a happy ending, it is a tragedy. You'd think in a comedy, maybe it would all work out. The bad guy would die on accident or something, and then Laertes and Hamlet would make up and everybody would live happily ever after. Something would happen like that, but since it's a tragedy, there's the one guy left standing to tell the story. Kind of like in Shakespeare, there's the one guy left standing to tell the story of what happened. I don't know.
Well, and just going back to what you were saying about the flowers and herbs, and now I'm thinking about Ophelia's always portrayed as having these love notes or all of the trinkets or all of the, I don't know, whatever, two lovers share, right? She has, whether it's notes or whatever, I think it's usually played as notes, but it makes more sense that she has that if she is pregnant. I mean, I'm just thinking about the way I've seen it played in the past, and she's always portrayed as having all of these love me nots from Hamlet. So that just kind of, I don't know, I think that reinforces the idea that she probably would be pregnant.
Well, and you know what, just
So it's interesting.
in this, I don't know why, Allison, but what you just said triggered the very beginning when Laertes is admonishing her. She says, "Oh, like you?" She turns it back on him. And so it makes me think, that was interesting too. That was an interesting little, so if you're going to hold me accountable to this standard, does that mean you also are going to be held accountable to that standard? And kind of, that does give us a hint there that if he's not held accountable, then would Hamlet also not be held accountable? And that's why Laertes and her dad are so so on her about it, because he's the king or the king's son, so she would have
Right.
no say, right?
Right.
I don't know. It's really interesting. I love this. It's so much fun.
Ophelia is one of the most interesting. I think Ophelia is one of the most interesting female characters ever, because she is, she does have such an interesting dilemma that women still relate to today, on some level. And so that's what makes her so timeless.
Yeah. Well, and I think we can find a little bit of ourselves in a lot of Shakespeare's characters, because they're just pictures of humanity.
Exactly.
As we move forward. Okay, so one more question before we move on. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but is Hamlet's love for Ophelia true or not? What do you guys think?
I believe it is.
Okay, how
but
come?
I think it's this. Primarily because after the grave scene and he sees the procession and he sees Laertes, they fight. He says, "I loved her," and I just choose to believe that moment. But then there's all this other, obviously then he still betrays her. He still does not trust her in any way. And so, that's why it's an interesting question, because I always choose to I like the, when he tells Laertes, "I loved her."
Yeah.
I like that part. Maybe that's me,
One positive part of the whole play. Kathleen, what do you think?
Right?
Oh, I think very much that he loved her, but I think that the way this is set up, there was so much on Hamlet's plate. I mean, you had brought up, here he is, he's dragging her around and he knows that her dad is in the room and he's thinking that she's complicit, but he's been betrayed by Claudius, his father. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern aren't really the friends that he thought they were. So in a very horrible place, but I think that he really did love her, and it is shown by the grave scene that there was a huge amount of regret once she was gone.
Yeah, I think so too. I feel like she was collateral damage that he didn't intend to happen. I think he probably thought, I'll just take care of this and then I'll wrap everything up.
I'll kiss and make up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll make everything
exactly.
right. He loves me so much, it'll be okay. And I think that the Stratford version really plays that really well, because you can see that he's torn up about her. Even in the scene where he's thinking that she's betrayed him, like just the conflict in him is so evident in that scene. I think I felt that made it more clear to me. When I read the text, I wasn't quite so sure, but through the Stratford version, I feel like they played it that way, that he truly did love her. And I liked that. In a play where everybody dies, it's nice to have something to hold on to.
Right.
It was true love.
Right.
They're all dead, but
Right?
there was some.
That and the comedy in the middle, just so that these 6 hours of play isn't too terribly depressing.
That is something else. We don't have time for that, but that's something else that I wrote down is, oh my goodness, there were so many moments where the audience is cracking up. And I'm thinking, wow, he wrote some comedy in here.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of this horrible tragedy, there's still these funny moments in there that I can see how it, again, depending on the director, could be really played well or not. And I mean, if this play was, going on and on, I can't imagine if he had too many plays that were all down in the dumps that people would want to keep going to watch them. And that was kind of a reality of his life. He made his living by the popularity of his plays. So
and from what I remember, and I don't remember where I read it, but one of the things I remember is Hamlet was one of his most popular, with multiple replayings. And like I said, it was about 6 hours long, 5.5 to 6 hours long, depending. And most of the audience stood up for that.
That is a long time. It's a long time to sit and watch that play. And it was not even 3 hours. I can't imagine standing for 5 to 6 hours to watch a play. It had to be good.
Hey, the most bang for your buck, though.
Right?
I mean, he was giving them, a good value.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, it is 7:30. So the time goes by so fast. I think
know.
It just goes by fast. So next week, we're talking about King John, which I have not read before. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And I'm not sure, Kathleen, I know you're coming back again. And Allison, I think you are too, but I don't remember which play you're coming back for.
I don't either. I'll have to look.
So
I'll have to look. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see you again in the next couple of weeks. But thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Karen. Have a great night. Take care.
Bye.